Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Daniel Melo, immigration lawyer, author of Borderlines, The Edges of U.S. Capitalism, Immigration, and Democracy. Also on the program today, last night, the House approves a continuing resolution punting the question of the budget, extending it, and a debt ceiling raise. However, it heads to the Senate, where Republicans are all but certain to filibuster it. Meanwhile, the House, I should say the White House, convenes Democrats from both the House and the Senate over the stimulus, or I should say over the infrastructure bills, as a push begins to blame progressives over the corporatists who are actually obstructing Joe Biden's agenda. Speaking of Joe Biden, he is facing a backlash from supporters on his immigration fails, and it's starting to show up in his approval ratings. Joe Biden's approval ratings are in the toilet, and they've been draining ever since that introduction of the bipartisan infrastructure deal. And speaking of the border, Texas Governor Abbott, whose own favorability ratings are also in the toilet, parks hundreds of cars on the border, ostensibly to stop immigrants from coming in, but more obviously to deflect from those dropping poll numbers. Also, that's not a joke. Court filings show Trump's campaign knew their voting machine BS was, in fact, BS. And at the UN, China vows to stop building coal-fired power plants abroad. And the U.S. vows to double its foreign climate change aid. And lastly, Joe Biden announces more Pfizer vaccine purchases to share 1 billion doses with the world. Of course, increasing everybody's Wi-Fi reception, 5G connectivity. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I, of course, was joking about the 5G connectivity that comes with the Pfizer shots. I think everyone knows that it's mostly the Moderna that gives you the best reception. Is that not correct, Emma Vigeland?
Yes, it is. It's only the mRNA ones that turn you into a cell phone tower, though. The J&J one, it's still questionable what it does to your DNA.
You know, it's only 4G, that one.
That's only 4G. That reminds me. The other day when we were discussing the J&J vaccine, we were characterizing it as a fairly old, or I should say, typical technology. It is an adenovirus shot, and was corrected that really the only other time that we've used this is in the context of Ebola. So it is, which is why you get the 4G reception from it. But I just wanted to make that correction just in the way that we were sort of characterizing it as being a sort of more run-of-the-mill vaccine. The vaccines we have, and they've found now that the Johnson & Johnson is also very effective. And particularly, you could also get a booster with a booster shot. It would be super effective as well. So we have some very effective vaccines, and we are likely to see some type of approval for boosters for some cohort, at least, of our population very soon. And it's also likely, it appears that we're going to get the okay to provide vaccinations for children 5 to 12, and at least the Pfizer vaccine, and they are there's a belief that there's going to be the size of the dose is going to be about a third in general.
Something like 46 million children in that, I think, age group who are uneligible for vaccination.
Currently uneligible,
but could be open to that once that approval goes through, which would change things for sure.
Dramatically, I think. Yeah. Even if you had a significant percentage of those children vaccinated, it's going to make the situation at schools much better. And as a parent who is aware of that, I am breathing a bit of a sigh of relief, or at least anticipating one. All right, let's get to it. Last night we mentioned, or I should say in the headlines, I mentioned that the continuing resolution and the debt ceiling passed in the House as anticipated, mostly, I think, totally on party lines. Nevertheless, it's heading over to the Senate, where the Republicans are going to filibuster it. You don't hear about it. You don't hear it articulated that the Republicans are going to filibuster that much. It's just sort of, they expect it not to pass. Now, of course, it would pass. There's going to be at least 51 votes, and that includes a Republican in the Senate. But we have this bizarre rule about the filibuster, and the Republicans are obstructing it. It is not communicated to people. We should be getting rid of the filibuster. We're not going to. So that's the situation there. How that resolves, don't know yet. It could be passed by its own reconciliation bill. You'd have to have a vote-a-rama for each one of those provisions, and that's quite possibly what we might see. Meanwhile, we have this dynamic on the two infrastructure bills, one of which is actually the budget. The first is the bipartisan framework bill. The second is the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. There was a deal made by Nancy Pelosi and some of these corporatists who are looking to get rid of essentially tax raises that would come in the bigger bill for people over $400,000 a year. They want to roll back some rises in taxes. The state and local exemptions that was cut out years ago. And so some of these corporatists, and they also want to roll back. They don't want prescription drugs to be less for the American public. And that's a huge provision.
Which would save the government money. All of these things, tax raises, Medicare negotiating with Big Pharma, all of these things would save the government money, which is what they say they're in favor of, but they don't want to actually implement programs to have the pay force for.
Listen, most of the people who watch this show are savvy enough to know at this point that the House Democrats that want to kill some of these provisions, they receive donations for their campaigns. They have friends and family who are in these businesses from large corporate donors who don't want these provisions in any type of legislation because it will inhibit their profit-making ability. Same in the Senate when we're talking about Joe Manchin. And if you look at Kristen Sinema's donations, she is also there working on behalf of her donors. This is not an ideological question. When Joe Manchin brings up inflation, there's no ideology involved in here. In fact, there's no even wonkishness. There is no economists who are talking about long-term inflation at this point as being a significant danger. No one is doing that.
No one's serious.
No, yeah, and yet it seems very, very difficult for members of the media to grasp this concept. That's going to be part of the theme of the program today. Let's take just the first step of it, which is Pramila Jayapal was on CNN, and it has been clear before there ever was a fully formed bipartisan framework bill that the massive progressive caucus in the House, 96 members, at least a significant portion of them, were not going to sign on to any bill that did not contain, or at least was not brought up alongside Joe Biden's bill of $3.5 trillion. You know, Joe Biden wanted a little more than that. Bernie Sanders wanted a lot more than that. And they settled on $3.5 trillion. This is the characterization. You go back in history, the default, the baseline is, what does the president of the party want? Mm-hmm. That is where everyone's position is usually judged.
Especially when the president is Joe Biden and not, say, Bernie Sanders.
Exactly.
And the media usually goes along with that. But now that the Biden administration is in lockstep with many of the progressives and leadership in the Senate and the House, they still can't help but
it's really stunning.
Progressives.
It's really stunning. I mean, usually where the president is, and particularly one of Joe Biden's ilk, is the watershed, and everything is judged based upon where that is. We're watching a narrative where that's not the case. But here's Pramila Jayapal on CNN, and this is them developing this narrative that somehow it's the progressive caucus, not the 8 corporatists who are trying to bring home the bacon for their corporate donors, who are somehow the problem. Play this as clip number 2.
How many members are there of the House Democratic Progressive Caucus?
There are 96 members, and over half.
Pause it for 1 second. We should also mention this. Jake Tapper's been doing this for, I don't know, how many years?
He has no idea. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, right? That's a thing that exists. In my ear, producer, let me know. Like that, I've never heard of them before or chose to cover them honestly. So there's
another way you can do that too. You can say like, so the Congressional Progressive Caucus is nearly half the Democratic caucus in there. I mean, so like we're talking baseline here. All right, so go ahead.
How many members are there of the House Democratic Progressive Caucus?
There are 96 members, and over half are absolutely committed to making sure we deliver both bills at the same time.
So 48 Democrats will vote against the House infrastructure bill if it does not come with the budget reconciliation package. Is that right?
More than half of our members will vote for both bills. And this was the deal, Jake, that came out of the Senate when progressive senators passed the bipartisan bill in the Senate. It was on the specific understanding and commitment that both bills would move together. And so now we want to make sure that both bills are moving together, and we're going to hold to that commitment. And so, yes, more than half our members will not move the bipartisan bill without the reconciliation bill being passed.
There it is.
Yeah.
And here's the point. Nancy Pelosi is not going to bring up that bill if she doesn't have the votes. And so that's the bottom line. I mean, Jayapal's folks don't want to vote against anything in that context if they can avoid the bill coming up. Now, we'll see if Pelosi tries to jam it through, in which case they're going to suffer a loss.
And I don't think she's going to want to do that because, to reiterate, and Tapper could have framed it in a variety of ways, like going with the Biden agenda would have been one of them, that it's not in Pelosi's interest, it's not in Schumer's interest, it's not in Biden's interest, it's not, of course, in the progressives' interest to just pass the bipartisan bill first. The only people who want to do this and who are torpedoing it are the centrist corporate Democrats doing this for their own agenda. They want to kill the reconciliation bill in order to just deliver on the narrow framework that helps their donors and kill the human infrastructure provisions that might increase taxes on them. And that's how you frame that question.
Meanwhile, let's look at this next clip of Pramila Jayapal on with CNN's Brianna Keeler. You're going to see a theme here. I mean, it really is one of those days where the memo goes out. We know who we're going to try and blame here.
I'm actually saying that other people are willing to crash the entire Democratic agenda by refusing to come together on the reconciliation bill, which was the promise that was made. So I want to be very clear. We are the only people in the room right now that have said we want both bills done. There are other people in the Democratic Party who are saying we only want the infrastructure bill, and maybe or maybe not we'll get to the other bill. We are saying let's stick to the deal that was made, both bills, so that we can deliver real results.
There it is. She's got to lay it out because it's very unclear to CNN what the sequencing was. The sequencing was that the bipartisan bill only passed because there was an agreement to bring it up in the House with the reconciliation bill simultaneously, so that everybody has to jump at once.
She's got to say it real slow so you understand.
Well, apparently, and we will play this later in the program, Chris Cuomo does not watch CNN in the mornings and didn't have someone explain it to him very slowly. But we will talk about that later. Going to take a quick break. And we will be back with Daniel Melo, immigration lawyer, author of Borderlines, The Edges of U.S. Capitalism, Immigration, and Democracy. Be right back after this. Folks, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can help the show thrive and survive. Well, I guess really it would be more like sequentially. It would be survive and
then thrive. Right.
But surviving through thriving.
Oh, I want to thrive just enough to barely survive.
There you go.
Yeah, I know. Live hard, die young.
You go to jointhemajorityreport.com and become a member today. And a reminder, if you're one of those people who want the fun half, but you can't, you're in financial issues at the moment, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Have a little patience with us because it takes a while to go through all the emails. But we will hook you up in some manner that will be good for you, I guess. It's really the way. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And lastly, check out the AM Quickie. Go to majority.fm, scroll down to the bottom, sign up for the emails. Every day, we give you a breakdown of some of the top stories and stories that you might not hear. It's a little mix. And so check it out. It's a quick read, gives you a good start of your day. All right. Want to welcome Daniel Melo. He is a public sector immigration lawyer, author of Borderlines, The Edges of U.S. Capitalism, Immigration, and Democracy, to the program. Daniel, do we have you? Oh, there you are.
Hey.
How you doing? Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, so glad to be on.
We're here with Emma Vigeland. And all right, so let's just start. I mean, obviously, some very big immigration stories in the news right now. In particular, it appears as if immigration reform is not going to be a part of the reconciliation bill because of this person who is the parliamentarian. Just some random, essentially, person who is some type of wizard in the Senate and can basically make a ruling on these things. We also have this situation where we have, I've seen different numbers, but somewhere around 15,000 migrants from Haiti who are being I don't think the word is deported at this point because they're not getting any type of due process whatsoever. They're just being expelled from the country, ostensibly under the auspices of Title 42. And right now, I think as we speak, Greg Abbott has got an entire fleet of cars that are lined up along the border in Texas to stop people from walking through them like it's like a parking lot. Like, I don't even understand. That is just too bizarre. Let's touch on those as we go through some of the things you've written, because I think they sort of, in many ways, illustrate some of the points that you make in your book. But let's just start sort of with the history and the development of our immigration policies, sort of broadly speaking, and what they're designed to do from the perspective of, I guess, like our capitalist economy.
Sure. So as briefly as I can, right, because this history actually goes all the way back to, pre-independence times, where you had the first migrants, which weren't actually called migrants at that point, but indentured servants being brought over from Europe, from Australia, and actually being sold, more or less, not on the same level, obviously, as slavery, but being sold into indentured servitude here in the U.S. So it was literally like early migration was around labor primarily, and the control between early colonies, and then eventually between the states and the federal government. We had this grappling back and forth about who was going to have the say over who came into the country and how. And eventually, this ends up getting sort of resolved as just this kind of greater incident to sovereign power or state power from the federal level. But at all points throughout that history, right, we're looking at things through this lens of ultimately it's a question of control, right? Controlling labor flows or controlling power. Some of the earliest laws around immigration were to protect the sort of hold that the original founding group of folks had over the country, keeping things like anarchists or even just poor Irish people from coming over and potentially usurping some of the early capitalist kind of dominance of the country. Even the abolition of the international slave trade, right, actually wasn't because the Congress at the time was interested in that as a humanitarian aim, but actually was afraid that the recent Haitian revolution might get transplanted to the southern states and get kicked off there. And so whether you're talking about strictly labor concerns or more broadly preservation of power issues, that has always been the case moving throughout our history.
Let's move up into sort of I guess the more modern era of immigration, which I don't know if you would argue, but you definitely said the Coleman Blees. Am I pronouncing his name correctly?
Right, I think that's right. Coleman Blees, yeah, which was the first. White supremacist from South Carolina, passes the first criminalization, so the actual criminalization.
Senator.
Excuse me, yeah, senator from South Carolina. Passes the first criminalization, actual like legal criminalization of migration, which is in its own shape and form still present today, right? And so there's a little known piece of immigration, largely the ones that we know about, right? The context that we're familiar with is that civil piece where people are just trying to stay here in the country, but there's actually a criminal statute for unlawful entries or re-entries where people are charged with an actual crime, end up going to prison and eventually kicked out, right? And so during that same period that gets used, right, to criminalize migrants, to CBP the Border Patrol would actually like take them at times to work on farms. They would donate basically their labor, and then once the agriculturists were done with them, then they would get removed or thrown out of the country, right? So whether we're talking about the civil level or say with Coleman Blees and the criminalization of migrants, we're still looking at that ability to control migration very tightly.
That happened in 1929, and there's two, sort of like, I guess, sort of things happening in 1929. One, we're sort of like in the wake of a reemergence of the KKK and a reassertion of a reassertion of white supremacy, I guess you could say at that time. There's also, we're starting to, head in to the Great Depression. And so there is I guess a sentiment of, or there's an opportunity for concern about migrants taking jobs. Can you talk about a little bit about that dynamic and sort of how that, that really still, both those things are in effect, I guess, 90 years later.
Right, absolutely. I mean, that narrative is the one that we've heard fairly recently is a very old one, that, you were heading in the Great Depression, there are fewer and fewer and fewer and fewer jobs. And at that point, like, there's a great opportunity, especially from the more racist elements and white supremacist elements of the country, to find a scapegoat, right? And so it's not, and when we talk about all of this stuff, it's like, it's not that there was always this sort of clear line of thought necessarily that was constantly guiding. It wasn't a conspiracy, right, at all times to control migrants. Rather, it's like there were just opportunities, such as, once again, we enter the Depression, there's this opportunity to criminalize them because, we don't have any particular use for them right now. So why not look to them to blame them for some of our circumstance and get them thrown out. But then if you go on the flip side of the Depression, right, and entering the World War II era, suddenly there's a massive labor shortage in the country because all of our young men are being shipped overseas to fight. And so we literally didn't have enough people to man factories and the war effort. So Congress then turns around and authorizes the Bracero program, which is bringing massive amounts of labor, largely from Mexico, to come and start tending fields, factories, all of that stuff, right? And in that case, once again, not a humanitarian effort. They weren't allowed to bring their families. It was short-term labor contracts. And as soon as war's over and those needs start to die down, we start seeing massive deportation campaigns again in the late 60s, early 70s.
Can we step back just for a moment and talk a little bit of interject a little bit of theory here and talk, and this from a Marxist perspective, I guess, the critique of our capitalist system, in that there is a tension within the context of a capitalist economy between the idea that you want your workers to be able to afford your product, I guess, as like Ford would say, but also at the time you need to be able to exploit your workers because you need to make a profit. And so where does the immigrant and on some extent you've already sort of explained it in maybe more practical terms, but where does the immigrant, the idea of having an undocumented immigrant, come into that equation?
Absolutely. So there is that tension, right? It's a contradiction within capitalism that it's like, in order to continue accumulating capital against the falling rate, the declining rate of profit, you've got to make up those differences somewhere, right? And immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are a great way to do that. And we can talk a little bit about how it even happens in the legal immigration context as well. But undocumented immigrants, when agribusiness 5-10 years ago started complaining about massive labor shortages here in the country and their declining profits, what they were actually saying is that we're running out of cheap labor, right? That the consequences of shutting off the border and some of the other laws that had been passed a decade or prior to that, or 2 decades prior to that, we're losing our ability to maintain our profits and continue to provide cheap commodities to the populace, right? We're not able to compete in a global market without these laborers who are willing to work for substandard wages in horrendous living conditions. So when they're decrying these labor shortages in that context, right, what they're really saying is that we're losing our ability to accumulate capital off the back of migrants who are willing to work in these terrible conditions.
Talk about how that also functions in the context of legal immigration, and also I guess we should also mention the sort of the dilemma that we have about both outsourcing the jobs to, you know, I guess from our perspective, foreign people, but also we have a problem with the jobs staying here and foreign people. I mean, there's a sort of a slight contradiction there as well, or at least a dilemma for us.
Yes, absolutely. So to use a fairly straightforward example, the H-1B visas, excuse me, which are skilled worker visas, primarily used in the IT sector. We're bringing large numbers of folks from abroad here to the U.S. to fill supposedly big job vacancies in that sector. Well, of course, if you start to look at the numbers, especially around a few years ago when some of that was on the table and big parts of the discussion in that community, you see that it's like, well, this isn't entirely true. There aren't necessarily this huge shortage of American, and I'll just use that term loosely for the moment, American workers that aren't willing or able to fill those spots. And then if you look even more closely and you find out that, you know, the H-1Bs are supposed to have these protections, that they're paid the same wages as the typical citizen worker, and so that they're not able to undercut the rest, is not actually true. The Department of Labor gives a great deal of deference to the companies to set what the prevailing wage is. So what the companies end up doing, Microsoft, Apple, whoever, Google, you know, get to bring these folks over, pay them way less than
something
they
like
would otherwise pay
40% less, right?
Yeah, sometimes just like categorically, just you know, in a whole other tier of pay, which is of course for those folks in many countries is still a great deal more than they were making in their home country, and we can come back to that dilemma. But then at the end of that time, whether that's a year, 2 years, 5 years, the company is under zero obligation to sponsor that person for any kind of permanent residence. So essentially they dangle the person's legal status over them. And if they complain, they start to organize anything at all, they can just cut off their contract and they're out, they're gone, right? So it's the use of the law, the convolution, its complexity, its enforcement mechanisms to ensure that migrants sort of stay under thumb that way when it comes to maintaining profit and pay. Now, of course, you know, some leftists, Angela Nagel comes to mind, right, of talking about sort of that U.S. protectionism or Western protectionism, and saying we should be actually for closed borders because it's protecting local workers and local people from experiencing those kind of wage undercuts, right? But that is exactly the kind of, in my opinion, regressive and almost reactionary thinking that's only going to set us further back, right? Instead of looking to how the populations abroad might be undercutting wages, we should instead be turning our focus to instead look and say, okay, but why is it that we are seeing these migration patterns, or why is it that capitalists need to undercut folks at all, and instead focusing in on the fact that it's like, no, the people who get to make these decisions, the folks that have the power over this, that is where we need to turn our focus to.
I mean, it raises the point that when we think about, HB1 visas, how those laws get made. I mean, it's not terribly dissimilar from our tax codes largely, which is the corporations who have the greatest interest in this deploy the greatest amount of political pressure through lobbyists and through other programs. And, you know, even if you have lawmakers with the purest of intentions, which I'm only saying for the sake of argument,
sure.
That the shaping of these laws reflect the desires and, according to them, needs of these corporations. And their need is to get the cheapest amount of labor they possibly can in those instances. There was I just saw a tweet in regards to sort of the notion of, where we're going to cut off unemployment benefits we have for workers with the hopes that, you have businesses saying like, there's a shortage of labor here. And they made the point that like nobody goes into a car dealership and says, I want to buy an Audi, but, I only got like $6,000. There's a shortage of Audis. I can't find one. It's because you're not paying for it. And that there's that dynamic to it. All right. So, but let's, did you have a question?
No.
Okay. So let's talk about those forces, because ultimately when we start to talk about like how to deal with these things, talk about those forces that create this dynamic because there is an argument on the left that that comes in and out of favor at different times, that the allowance of migrants coming in suppresses wages for American workers, and certainly short of some type of immediate path to citizenship where they're getting the maybe anemic but some protections that American workers were. There's going to be that element of it.
Right, exactly. And I think you actually, you targeted the solution in the question, right? But the exact same argument was made when women started to enter the workforce, right? That it's like unions talked about barring women from membership, barring women from, participating in the workforce at all for that exact reason, right? That it's like they're going to be used to undercut our wages. And if we allow the ruling parties, the ruling class, the capitalists, to dictate that to us, then yes, it would absolutely be true, right? That it's like they can and they will be used against other members of the working class if we allow them to do that. And so it's cliche, but it's like we've got to gather up then the strength of the working class and again, not look to them as opponents over scarce resources, but start to ask the question, who is it that's getting to decide how these resources are divvied up in the first place? Right. And so to that end, the work right now that I'm trying to do to a greater or lesser extent and many others are trying to find that legal footing for folks to help get them out from under the system long enough so that we can also start to organize a level of collective, citizen, non-citizen, whatever status, solidarity towards achieving that goal.
We should say that, the forces, we can see this even in play of like things like as to dropping the eligibility age for Medicare, right? Like there are some of the opponents of that are medical care providers who don't want to have price constraints on the care that they're providing. But then there's sort of like a generic capitalist class that are like, wait a second, this is going to create a little bit of scarcity when it comes to our workforce, because if I can get health care at age 60 or 55, maybe I choose to retire or cut back the hours I'm going to work or not take this job because I'm getting health care, which is a significant expense at that age and is, a big motivation for people staying in work that they don't want to be in, whether it's to get more money to pay for health care or because it's being offered there. And so there's knock-on effects. And so that's where, the medical care providers get their solidarity, I guess, with just generic people who want to suppress wages. So we have this dynamic. Before we get to sort of more solutions that you suggest, I want to just go back and get sort of some of the practical and sort of real world examples that you have of the way that we sell this dynamic and maybe mystify it a little bit in the context of American politics. Like when we start talking about, why should these immigrants who are coming in from Haiti just skip the line, and all of these things? I mean, I guess talk about the different sort of narratives that are deployed that obscure what the actual dynamic is going on here.
Absolutely, right. Like, to go a little bit further back than Haiti for a moment, you know, we had earlier in the summer or late spring, you know, Vice President Kamala Harris was in Central America, you know, giving basically these talks, and then I think it was in Guatemala, or maybe it was El Salvador, I can't remember which country she was in. She actually like explicitly says, don't come. We will enforce our laws. Don't come, right? And a piece that I wrote, like I pointed out the fact that it's like she has the benefit in this case, and to go to that point that you made about obscuring it, right? She has the benefit of time here where she doesn't have to talk about the fact that the last 100 or so, 150 odd years, the U.S. has been involved in some meaningful way, often militarily, throughout most of Latin America. And in large cases has just resulted in massive destabilization politically, economically, and socially, just huge destabilization. But she gets to go up there, right, because there's such a gap of time, because memory is so short here, gets to go up there, and after 150 odd years of imperialist policy that's basically helped create the conditions that force people to migrate to other places, gets to say, you know, you guys have a big corruption problem here and you need to figure it out, but don't look to us for solutions, right? You guys need to stay here and figure it out. Don't bother coming up here, right? And so this narrative just gets recapitulated over and over and over and over again in US politics around migration, because it largely tends to focus on merit, right? Like who should be here. The line, you know, is a big one of those, right? That people should just get in line. It's like, well, it's not, anyone can't just go to their, you know, their local US embassy and say, you know, I'd really like to can I take a number and get in line, you know, to jump on a plane to the US? It doesn't exist. You have to have a legal vehicle to get here. So let's take the common one, family petitions. For example, for a brother or sister of a US citizen who's in Mexico right now, the wait is 1996, I think, right now. You had to have an approved petition that was filed for you in 1996, and they'll give you a visa today.
So it's a 25-year wait if you have family members in this country.
Right, a U.S. citizen family member here in this country. You know, even for grown children, we're still talking about sometimes somewhere between 3 and 15-year waits for you to be able to bring, you know, your child, even if they're grown now, your child here to the US, right? And so, you know, when you have that closing off, when asylum is so very strict in terms of the means of lawfully entering the country with some kind of legal status, people are, you know, there's a quote from, I think it was the Second International, that talked about the fact that it's like the whip that drives migrants, the whip of hunger, is going to be stronger than any law that anyone ever passes, and any border that you ever set up, right? And so long as the capitalist forces are at work that are displacing people and causing this level of immiseration, we're always going to have migration, right? But what we lose is in the current level of debate is that very dynamic, right? The driving forces behind that, and instead we end up just talking about who deserves to stay or doesn't deserve to stay, which often centers around some sort of, you know, like, well, their personal situation just wasn't quite horrifying enough and therefore they can't stay. So, you know, to jump back to Haiti, it's like the fact that there were, you know, 2 major disasters and a political assassination, generally not enough to merit asylum.
Well, and I want to just return to this concept of enforcing laws that you brought up that Kamala Harris used as a part of her just stay home speech in South America. I wonder what your take is on the usage of like international law in some of these debates, because yes, international law says that we need to accept asylum seekers, and even US law says that, right? But a lot of times laws, like how Kamala Harris used it, can be deployed in a way that upholds capital and upholds inequity and exploitation. And it seems to me, one, she's not enforcing our laws, right, because of our asylum laws. But at the same time, she can say, oh, I'm enforcing, at the time at least, Title 42, which is our law. So in using that, is it more of a helpful tool for us as progressives and your work and what we're trying to achieve? Or is it usually deployed more cynically, like by people like Kamala Harris?
Honestly, mostly the latter, right? Like the law generally, and I try to point this out multiple times in the text, is like the law most of the time is used as a tool of exclusion rather than inclusion, right? And there's a level at which, and we don't have time today, but like there's a level at which that's just inherent in the nature of nation states and citizenship, because it is a question of who is included in the we. But even more broadly, it's like the international context, there's no guarantees whatsoever. And the Jewish refugee scholar, philosopher Hannah Arendt talks a little bit about this, that it's like the refugee actually is the true person of rights because they have no guarantors of those. They exist only in and of themselves. And in many ways, the fact that there is no nation to protect them proves that this concept of citizenship is actually broken.
I mean, just to expand a little bit on that, because I think that's important for people to understand this sort of notion of like the failure of the idea that you can have people sort of in between being a citizen and not, sort of stuck in this netherworld, is an indictment of the concept of citizenship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the millions of refugees worldwide is a daily indictment of that, in my opinion. Because, to use a recent example of Afghanistan, right? It's like we have 20 years of conflict there, millions of displaced people. There's no one, literally no one, that's accountable to them. No nation is required to take them on. The U.S. has no responsibility to bring any of them here. It's really only by the goodwill of a handful of places that they even get the paltry, refugee camps that, are set up throughout the globe, right? So yes, in that sense, right, the concept of citizenship is broken because the idea that everyone belongs somewhere and has protection from someone is inherently untrue.
So, all right, what do we do in this context? I mean, like, how do we, and is there really one thing to do? I mean, can you actually address this dilemma without addressing a whole series of other dilemmas?
I think the honest and the straightforward answer is no, right? Like, we're not going to suddenly open up borders tomorrow in the U.S. and solve the global migration crisis. We could do that for, all of North America. And while it would go a long way, it still is not going to overcome the problems that are inherent in capitalism that help create, the mass displacement of people in the first instance, right? So it is a tension. It's a tension that frankly gets rehashed within the movement all of the time of like, what do we target first? Do we try to legalize as many people as possible in order to have them be better protected and better able to organize? Do we not, do we skip that? Do we focus on, just struggles? But I think one fundamental piece that just cannot be left off the table is the constant reminder, especially on the left, that the citizen-migrant dichotomy was not set up by us as a collective, is not democratic, there's nothing inherently democratic about it, and that more importantly, that divide over and over helps reinforce the status quo. And so by first fundamentally questioning that divide, demanding justification for why is it that things are this way, I think we can at least have groundwork to start moving towards something more equitable.
Well, so what does that groundwork look like? I mean, like, you know, I'm not looking for maybe necessarily specific policies, but I mean, if you go forward in that way, you know, because it's a fascinating time where I feel like there's arguments on the left for like a new nationalism coming from the left on some level, but that which also cuts against that notion of like, but are we, you know, there are victims of that. You know, I mean, we're looking at, you know, 15,000 of them right now being sent to a country that has been, well, for, you know, 150 years, maybe, just on the wrong end of American imperialism, and also, you know, just within the past, like you say, 3 months, disasters and political upheaval, at least the political upheaval, and maybe the situation, you know, how they're situated to deal with those the disasters is a function of what we've done in the first place. I mean, so what's like, I don't know. I mean, what would be the first, you know, practical reforms that you would do? Would you focus on making the immigration system more equitable as a first step, or something else?
I mean, again, you know, it is a cart horse kind of debate that's happening, chicken and egg kind of debate that's happening internally. My personal perspective, at least at the moment on it, is that there needs to be a two-pronged kind of approach, right? We need to start working to integrate migrants, documented and otherwise, into labor organizing movements, because they do make up a large part of that. But then also simultaneously, right, that from a policy perspective, the more that we can get the state off their back, so to speak, that we can eliminate the tethers that they have that allow employers like Apple or Google or whoever in that context to pull the rug out from under them, you know, reduce the means of enforcement, reduce the means of deportation, broaden, you know, the availability of asylum. Those things, unfortunately, are going to have to go together, because without one, you sort of lose the benefit of the other.
All right. And lastly, you know, you're an immigration lawyer. We have a couple that call into this program. I'm curious, just from that narrow perspective, what reform? I mean, what is standing out for you to be? And in your book, you recount the stories of a couple of your clients over the years. But what, as it stands now, sticks out to you as being one of the most unjust aspects of our, you know, immigration system, I guess, from the perspective of someone who is working with people going through it on a daily basis?
Right. I'd say probably from a practitioner's perspective is the Illegal Immigration Reform Act, IRA, that Bill Clinton signed. It continues to do untold amount of damage to people, to families, and more importantly, to even within, just strictly within the practitioner context, it created so many penalties that it's made it very, very hard for a lot of people to try to fix their status, right? And has helped create some of the immigration crisis, the ongoing sort of level of undocumented people that we have in the country. So if there was any one thing that I could just wipe from the books tomorrow, it would, from a practitioner standpoint, would probably be IRA and just get rid of it entirely, because it would help a massive amount of people. But to the extent that, you know, we had any other kind of mass legalization, I would, you know, in all likelihood would like to see something like that as well, to start building better groundwork for a better collective working class movement.
Basically an amnesty type of situation.
Yeah, and I would, you know, of course, that framework gets used. I don't think that people who have been here our whole lives, you know, we can call it amnesty, but nevertheless, yes, some sort of legal protection for them.
Daniel Melo, the book is Borderlines, The Edges of U.S. Capitalism, Immigration, and Democracy. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, folks, quick break, and we will be back and wrap up this program for at least some of you. So just wrapping up here, we do have a situation where, like, can we put up the pictures of Greg Abbott's cars? Can you get that? It is absolutely, it's total insanity, but it gives you a sense of how immigration is used, or the question of immigration is used in this country as just a way of obscuring. Can we get it? Get it? We got it? I mean, that's nuts, right? Like this idea, they're just putting cars. It's just so stupid.
Do we see what kind of car? Because if he was being a real American man, we'd have the biggest monster trucks.
Those look like cruisers, right? Or
all right,
police SUVs?
That's pretty on
SUVs.
point.
Be cool if they could like steal them and just drive them into the country.
Right. No, wait. Hey, we are leaving the keys in the ignition.
Getaway
this is for
cars.
You to, yeah, right.
Also, I just look at some of these pictures and I just wonder, like, how do they get their doors open? They just like park and everybody has to walk out, like,
get out the back.
Yeah, they're going to have to do it one at a time. It's just a silly stunt and it's disgusting. All right, well, that is all our time. If you're watching us on Peacock, we will say goodbye and see you tomorrow.
Goodbye and see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
Hey.
And for those of you who are not, we're back. All right, so we're going to go into the fun half. We got more to talk about, specifically dealing with the way the media is already attempting to frame. And look, this is not to be unexpected. I tweeted out something about Chris Cuomo, and we're going to play the clip, but I tweeted out in a sort of like a way to sort of say, like, why is Chris Cuomo doing this? I know why Chris Cuomo's doing it, because whatever reason. But the responses for some people are just like, where have you been?
Of course. Like,
well, yes.
You're hopelessly naive. How long have you been doing this? The Democratic Party isn't here for you, man.
Well, that part of it was just more like, Chris Cuomo, like, will you expect him to... I'm like, no, dude.
No.
It's a rhetorical
What's weird
trick.
is people really don't pick up on sarcasm on Twitter.
It's not even sarcasm. It's just like, oh, yes.
It's how to most effectively pose a question that shames somebody into action.
Exactly.
Or one that doesn't alienate everybody who might be like on the fence.
Well, it's also on some level to embarrass Chris Cuomo. I mean, the guy has a habit of searching himself, and Twitter is really about trying to influence the perspective, and that's why they deploy bots. It's not because they think that people deploy bots. It's not because they think that they can influence, the American opinion directly. No, they are trying to influence the people who have access to the bigger platforms,
right,
and give them a sense. And so when you pose a question like, why would you do this? You are basically setting it up like this is just a neutral normative position that I'm starting from, and I am asking this question not because I am ideologically driven, but because this is merely a question of math.
Well, people just sometimes, they
want to express their own savvy.
Well, it's not even expressing their own savvy. It's about only going for the kill and having one tactic, straight line ahead.
Yeah. Exactly. And the bottom line is, like, we want CNN to stop framing things in this way. Why? Because the Democrats often also feel that pressure because they're still sort of living in the Beltway in the way that, the Republicans, their whole project is sort of antithetical to government, and their people are on talk radio and are operating under a different formula. Well, all that said, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the phone number. You can IM the show by getting the app at majorityapp.com. Of course, if you want the show to survive and then subsequently thrive, you become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget, Nomi's show tonight, youtube.com/The Nomiki Show. Nomiki Show.
Just commit to one.
Nomiki.
Just commit to one.
Nomiki, I think it is. Nomiki Show. And Matt, what is happening in the Matt Legging universe? I can't remember which one it is that I commit to each time.
But like, okay, try it on. Say today's no Miki, tomorrow's no Miki.
Okay, fair enough.
All right,
fair enough. Wait, which one's today?
Today was both. You've already botched it, but in the future you can maybe just.
Or I didn't botch it because I did both. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian universe of media?
Yeah, tonight on Left Reckoning, you can subscribe to that on YouTube, folks. We have David Gerard. He's a crypto expert. We're going to be talking about not only why cryptocurrencies are silly and not currencies, but gambling, sort of funny money, but also blockchain and smart contracts are also BS, basically just to try to attract dumb venture capitalist money, as the real reasons for Bitcoin, which is speculation, became more apparent. So that's tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central, patreon.com/leftreckoning to get the post game.
I think you meant YouTube.
What did I say?
YouTube.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's YouTube.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube. See you in the fun half.
Yikes.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Bring back DJ.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them.
Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back, ladies and gentlemen. That is the sound of us taking phone calls and not allowing our callers to hear me use swear words, which I am sensitive about. I don't like to swear It's you know, because of the kids. Because I don't want the kids to hear me swear.
Oh, so should I swear less?
I don't. You don't strike me as someone who's, you know, swearing too much. Other people can swear. That's up to you. It's like, you know. But I
want to traumatize the kids.
Well, all right, fair enough. But I don't think it really traumatized the kids. It's just when I was on radio, when I started to do this, you really had to not swear, because if you swore, if we swore on the Majority Report, if Janine and I had sworn on the Majority Report, we had something like 40 to 50 affiliates. And the FCC would have fined us for each swear on each affiliate.
Wow.
And we were under the impression, and I think it was probably an accurate one, that there were right-wing entities that were monitoring for such things and would have brought that up. So you could say one F word and cost the company tens of thousands of dollars.
Well, I never swear in the first hour for Peacock. That's pretty,
We got to start. We got to add
Gotta
that.
ramp it up.
Peacock.
We got to roll that in. But
do you remember the first swear word you ever learned?
Oh, wow.
Oh, God. No.
I definitely don't.
No, I don't.
I do.
You remember the first one I learned?
Like, yeah.
You remember the first one I learned?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. What was it? You were here, actually, when I first learned it. Yeah.
I have a diary entry from like age 7, and I found when I was helping my mom move.
Yeah.
I'm like 7, and I'm talking about a soccer ref that gave us a bad call, and I go,
how on brand is it that your first swear word was deployed?
No, there are multiple.
Aiming at a referee of a sporting match.
Yeah, it is pretty poetic.
It's probably where I learned to swear too, honestly.
I think I said in my diary, I write, misspelled, she's a fucking bitch and a bucket of shit.
Oh, Jesus.
And I remember my friend at the time in like 2nd grade, Jackson, just taught me the gambit. And I think within the same...
Wow, they must have had an older sibling.
Yes. And in the same 2 weeks, I called my sister. I called her a bitch. She's like...
I like how you had to whisper that now.
Because she was 4.
Well, 4-year-olds can be tough.
Yeah, I know.
Believe me.
I remember the first time I got in trouble for kind of not really swearing, but the middle finger. I remember somebody, it was really young, but I remember that to this day, a guy sort of cut in front of my dad in traffic and then give the middle finger through the back of the window. And I didn't know what that meant, but it changed the atmosphere in the car quite a lot. But a few days later, I was in church and I just had my middle finger extended. There was a lot of music going on. I was just kind of like waving it around.
Oh my God.
And I noticed
that is hilarious. You're just waving it around to see like what happens in church. Look at everybody.
I was kind of enjoying the music and stuff, and I noticed these like teen girls laughing at me before, so I like turned around to kind of like look at what they're doing, but I'm still like doing the middle finger thing, and my mom grabs my hand and says, "Don't do that. I'll tell you why not to after church."
Well, at least she gave you the benefit of the doubt of not knowing what you were doing.
Did you think you were impressing the girls? Is that why?
Well, I know I was impressing them because they were laughing, but I didn't know I don't know exactly why what I was doing to impress them, other than extending my middle fingers.
And for the next like 20 years, that's the way
That's why I walk down the street.
Ladies.
That middle finger, wow, got you a lot of places.
I was 9, and I remember being at camp, and I can't remember what the scenario had something to do with, like people walking up the side of a mountain and other people like maybe, I don't know, taking a car up the side of the mountain. The counselor was like, why did they take the car up? And I think I said, because they're pussies. and he said, don't use that word. And I'm like, what? They're pussies. And he slapped me on the face. And I was like, I don't understand. He goes, it's wussies. And I go, what? I had never heard that word, wussies. I didn't know what pussy had, like, I thought it meant, like, you know, they're wimps or whatever.
Like little
it was.
cats or.
No, I just thought, like, I don't know, wimps. Like, I had no idea what any of the etymology of that word was. And the guy hit me across the face, and I still, like, I don't even know what wussies is. I've never heard of it. And, you know, just like in Worcester.
Hit you across the face? Was he like a teen camp counselor or an old camp counselor?
He was not invited back the next year. He was a guy. It was like it was overnight.
Kids.
No, it was overnight. Well, at that time, like,
I was even then though.
Hitting
right?
was just a little bit more. I mean, the way the guy would punish us at camp, it was like a sleepaway camp. He would force you to stand outside of the bunk in your underwear at, like, night, doing this with your arms spread out and get bit by the mosquitoes. I mean, it was pretty twisted.
That's bizarre.
The guy's name was Don Swanbeck.
How old was he?
I mean, I don't know. I was 9, so everybody just seemed like 50 to me.
Yeah.
I quit Boy Scouts for a similar experience. We were doing BB gun shooting, and I didn't put my muzzle straight up after I had shot at the BB, and apparently that was like, you need to do it immediately after. And this dude I'd never seen before, we're like prone, lying on the ground, slaps me on my ass, and I'm like,
whoa.
I looked up at him, I remember his like mustachioed guy, and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be doing Boy Scouts anymore.
That's pretty, like,
Oh,
I
boy.
mean, what we know about the Boy Scouts now, that's good you got out.
Hey. All right, let's get down to some brass tacks. We've had this.
You want to keep going on this?
Shit, no. Look at that.
Yes.
All right, here we go. Boy, I have really. That's my edgelord stuff.
Right.
All right, so we've been talking about what is happening in terms of the way this whole bipartisan framework infrastructure bill and the reconciliation bill thing is going down. And this is really instructive because when you look back, and I don't want to relitigate anything, but when you look back to different times where people have said progressives should leverage their votes because it is going to do something in terms of the public opinion about something. Understand that you cannot make these calculations in a vacuum. We have a corporate media that is also, to the extent that there's any ideology, and I don't care, I mean, if you're talking about Fox, you're talking about CNN, or talking about MSNBC. Mm-hmm. I can tell you at the very least, the administration of whatever, the corporate leadership of MSNBC, whether it's, you know, whether you're talking about its ownership in terms of the Comcast or GE, and I don't know how much GE owns of it anymore. It used to own 51% back in the day. It's definitely a minority share if it has any, which is largest maker of weapons in the country, maybe the world. Mm-hmm. They're not going to side with a narrative that in any way is beneficial to progressives, never mind leftists. And so you need to work that into your calculation when you're talking about some type of like legislative leveraging by, you know, progressives in the House. That's, or the Senate for that matter. That's just a reality, right? Like you could say like, oh, they're going to walk out with an umbrella. But if there's a hurricane out there, it ain't going to make a difference. And this is a prime example of that. You have progressives who are putting a line in the sand, and we're talking about maybe it's 25% of the entire Democratic caucus. Maybe it's closer to like 60 to, you know, maybe it's closer to like 45% of the Democratic caucus who are saying we are putting a line in the sand exactly where the White House told us to draw it. We are the normal. We are the norm. We are the watershed in which any any divergence from should be seen as the divergence.
Yes.
Should be seen as the other, should be seen as the obstruction. However, CNN is rewriting that framework. I give you, should we start with, which one should we start with?
Chris Cuomo?
Chris Cuomo. Well, let's start with the Chiron from CNN's The Situation
Okay,
Room.
yes.
Okay? They bring on Justice Dems spokesperson Waleed Shahid.
Or no, he,
I said, sorry. He
took the
screenshot. He took the screenshot. They've brought on like this crew of, I don't know, talking heads from Casey Hunt.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And here it is. Breaking news. Progressive Dems dig in, threaten to tank Biden agenda. That is not what's happening.
Nope.
The Biden agenda is the $3.5 trillion bill. The so-called bipartisan thing was a sop to the corporatists to get them to sign on to the Biden agenda. The Biden agenda is the $3.5 trillion bill.
It's both, and progressives say they are going to vote for both. The only people saying they aren't going to vote for both are the moderates. Then that's the group that you direct your ire at. They are the ones tanking the Biden agenda.
We saw Pramila Jayapal have to slowly walk Breonna Kyler through this. Earlier in the show, we played that clip. Then we saw her have to slowly walk Jake Tapper of CNN, who was not apparently aware of how many members there were in the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
Or even what it is,
through.
For that matter.
And here is Chris Cuomo just sort of like talking about, I can't believe these progressives are going to tank this thing.
Do you realize how precarious a position the president is in, and not with the big lie, not with people who wanted to steal the election, not with people trying to convince people that it's freedom to not take the vaccine, his own party. Tonight's vote on moving the debt ceiling, that's just a stray shot. The real risk is that the Democrats may hand power back to the Trumpers. How? These internal divisions are real and really threatening Biden's agenda. It may not get done. Pelosi pushing the 27th as a drop-dead date for a spending bill that has no agreement only makes things worse.
Pause it for 1 second.
The House is voting on
Pause it for 1 second. Let's just be clear what he's talking about there. This was a demand by 9 members of Congress that the vote take place on the 27th. Pelosi didn't want to do it. She did it. I'm not saying she has no agency here. But let's be clear on what the dynamic is. It is not like sort of Pelosi sort of randomly doing this. It is because there are 9 obstructionist Democrats, corporatists, who are holding up the entire process. And also, notice, he doesn't define what Biden's agenda is. Because if he did, he'd have to admit what the reality is that those are the people who are threatening not to vote for the vast majority of the agenda. 3.5 is bigger than 1.2. Can we all agree on that? Continue.
Spending bill that has no agreement only makes things worse. The House is voting on legislation that could help avert a government shutdown, right? The division, though, within the party is the problem, and it's real. The center left, the moderate Democrats, are increasingly at odds with what the progressives want, which is what President...
What is that, the center left? First off, I mean, I don't want to get caught up in like these like center left. Like, these are not moderate Democrats. How do you have moderate Democrats? They are at the furthest edges of conservatism in the party. They are at the furthest edges of republicanism within the party. They are at the furthest edges of corporatism in the party. The moderate is Joe Biden. Joe Biden's whole political career has been, I'm placing myself in the center of the party. That's what the $3.5 trillion is. It is at the center of the party. Bernie Sanders wanted $6 trillion.
As is Schumer, as is Pelosi, as representatives of the party, and Biden as a representative of the party. That's how it's worked throughout history, as you pointed out before, that most of the time, except now in this instance, because they have to find a way to change the conversation and blame progressives, the president's agenda is the party's agenda. And that's what the progressives want. And they are not framing
That's what they have compromised to.
Right. And that's not what they are framing it as for the first time in a really long time. First time since I can remember. And why is that? It's because the progressives are on board with it.
David Roberts tweeted out this political article. Cinema tells White House she's opposed to current prescription drug plan. And Roberts writes, 90% of the public wants the government to be able to negotiate drug prices. Cinema, one of Congress's biggest recipients of pharma money, doesn't. There's a whole article about it, and she never once says or is asked why. She's just moderate.
Exactly. And I mean, they're trying to obscure what's going on here. But I continue with the video.
The division, though, within the party is the problem, and it's real. The center left, the moderate Democrats, are increasingly at odds with what the progressives want, which is what President Biden, that's his starting point. So he's with the farther left on his spending bill. It's very aggressive. The center left, where he used
Pause it. No. No. Joe Biden's not with the farthest left. Yeah. The left already compromised. $6 trillion was what Bernie Sanders wanted. $6 trillion was what Bernie Sanders wanted. Joe Biden didn't come to $6 trillion. The left okayed a middle point. This has already happened. And you'll recall, like, there was a lot of time that the left spent on trying to cement that narrative. But Chris Cuomo ignoring it. Continue.
Want, which is what President Biden, that's his starting point. So he's with the farther left on his spending bill. It's very aggressive. The center left, where he used to be, and the moderates, they really don't want it. And they're starting to almost sound like they're from different parties. Here's the problem. If the Senate, the Democrats there, if they won't give on the reconciliation price tag in a way that appeases the far left slash the president, and the response from the fringe is to stall the infrastructure bill that's been agreed on in the Senate, President Joseph Biden could literally go 0 for 2. You stave off the big lie. You stave off an insurrection. You beat the most poisonous president in a generation, only to have your own party leave you vulnerable? Are you serious?
Are you serious? The fringe is doing this. So just to be clear, by any definition of the fringe, you've got upwards around minimum 50 people who are not on board with this. They're the fringe, as opposed to the 9 who are sinking the president's agenda.
And it's not just 50 people. Again. It's Biden. It's Pelosi. It's Schumer. It's party leadership. But that's inconvenient. He also doesn't define fringe. He doesn't say really necessarily what he's talking about. He just talks about party divisions. And he hopes that the rest of CNN's programming potentially can do the work for them, because they all got the memo.
They have.
Right. That's the point. People, when he says fringe, they know what they're talking about.
When he says we staved off the big lie, I mean, that's news to me, because as far as I know, I've heard we're going to try to out-organize voter suppression. And the reason we're not passing any legislation to expand and protect voting rights is because these exact same quote-unquote moderates standing in the way of that, too.
Yeah, we staved off the big lie. Like, this kind of stuff is percolating, and Republicans have made gains across all these state houses. This is going to be going on for decades to come.
It is stunning when you think about what I mean, by any definition, how would you define the Biden agenda? Not full of things that
President Joseph Biden's agenda.
President Joseph Biden's agenda.
Joseph
well,
Robinette
it was
Biden.
voting protection. It was reinstating a big part of the Voting Rights Act. It was reinstating a $15 minimum wage, or I should say raising it to a $15 minimum wage. Prescription drugs. It was immigration reform. There is a specific person and cohort of the Senate that is stopping that and has stopped all of that stuff. And yet, we've never heard it framed in that way. Never heard it framed as Joe Manchin, the obstructionist. It's like, how do we convince Joe Manchin or, persuade him?
Yeah.
It really is stunning. And, I would encourage people, when we cut this video, and tell Dorsey to put this one early, keep tweeting it at Cuomo. Just, get them defensive about this, because they should be. Calling from a 407 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Well, this is Rudy. How you doing?
Excuse me?
Oh, I'm a libertarian, so...
So your phone's not good? Listen, are you covering your speaker? However you're talking into, whatever you're talking into is muffled, unless this is some type of like ransom call.
How about now?
A little bit better.
Hey, this is Rudy. I'm I guess what they would call a libertarian.
Who's they?
So, I guess you.
Okay, so Rudy, where are you calling from?
407 is Orlando.
Okay. What's on your mind?
Pretty much regulations. I guess I'm a YouTube fan of yours, and I work in air conditioning, refrigeration.
Yeah.
And regulations are kind of ridiculous with my industry as far as permitting and especially licensing. Licensing, the requirements are unbelievable nowadays.
In Florida.
And pretty much any state. I'm pretty sure regulations are nationwide.
Who creates those? Are those federal regulations or are they state regulations?
Actually, the feds are getting into it now with energy efficiency regulations that the states are
adopting. So the feds have energy requirements, right? I know that, like they have it for home heating units, and they're saying it for. I would imagine there are probably some for HVAC, but the vast majority of the regulations you're dealing with are propagated by the Florida state legislature. But okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So compliance is pretty much up to the customer. I usually give like a couple of quotes, one with permitting, one without permitting, and the permitting seems like it's just a unnecessary hassle that doesn't really protect the consumer from anything.
The permitting, I would imagine, when you talk about permits, that's going to be even more local, right? You're not filing with a state agency to get the permit to build that. I think you're probably, I mean, if it's like New York, if you're doing some type of construction work, you are filing with maybe the county, but probably the town or the city?
Yes.
Okay.
But all the regulations are based on national standards. There's an organization called ASHRAE that produces standards every 4 years for energy efficiency, for all kinds of stuff that like contractors. I mean, they use them as references once in a while, but they're not complied with, and obviously, like inspectors are not going to check every single thing, so it's pretty much impossible for the government to get involved in any of this stuff. Pretty much the only reason that licensing and permitting exists, in my opinion, is just to steal money from the contractors and obviously from the customer, because you have to increase the prices of what you're installing. So, and same thing goes for, I'd imagine, any industry. You know, I know about air conditioning and engineering. I also worked in the engineering field, and all that is just pretty much recommendations, and the engineers use them. sometimes we use rules of thumb and mostly to produce. Because if we're going to follow every single regulation, we're not going to be profitable. So it's just an unnecessary hassle. And
so you don't think there should be any regulations in the context of, let's say, building buildings? Do you think that like there should be requirements as to how much, I don't know, like maybe what the quality of the cement is? You're in Florida, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any recollection of anything that might have happened in Florida over the past year that implicates, let's say, things like safety for building codes?
Yeah, I watched your debate with Yaron Brook.
Mm-hmm.
I started talking about building that fell.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah.
I've read up on that, and it looks like it's 8 years ago there was an engineer, a private engineer that they hired to give them a report on the structure of the building, and they have their little, community inside the building that they debate stuff and what gets funding and what doesn't, and as far as repairs.
Right.
And,
right, but you answered your own question. It's a private.
Well, okay, but what do you take? What do you take from that?
That the government inspector failed.
Wait, who's the government inspector?
There was a certificate of occupancy issued by the state for that building.
And so, so maybe what they failed by what? Not coming enough and ordering the building to do it. Like the argument you're making is there should be stricter government regulation regarding that structure.
They don't work.
They shouldn't be allowed to debate it. There shouldn't be allowed to debate it. As soon as that, there probably should have been a regulation that said, hey, if this engineer has this finding, they've got to file it immediately with this regulatory body. And if we don't get that regulatory body does not get a compliance with that recommendation, we're gonna say the building is condemned.
It's impossible. There's no way to get the specialists you need under government. Everybody that knows what they're doing in building construction and installation of
Dude, you just said the private engineer went through there and gave it to, where was the government involved in that process?
It doesn't, even if the government had the report, they wouldn't have been able to interpret it. The residents are just like the government. It would have been pretty much like the committee that they had there interpreting it, but they would call it like the state. The state is interpreting it instead of the committee for the condominium there.
Well, that committee for the condominium, they're private. They're not the state.
Yes, but that's what you would see in a government.
No, they just debated because they were like, we can hold off. We don't want to spend the money.
Yeah, they took the risk and they suffered the consequences. I guess it's unfortunate, but that's what happens when you take risks.
Oh, I see. When you take risks. I see. And so everybody in that building took that risk.
Well, yeah, they had 8 years to fix it.
Everybody in that building. Kids.
Well, they put the parents of those kids. The parents were the owners.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So.
Yeah. So no. So let's walk through this. Parents were. The kids had the mistake of making parents who made the mistake of trusting the board. Is that it?
They are the board.
Do you have kids? Do you have kids?
Yes.
Okay. What do you know about cars?
A lot, actually.
Okay. What do you know about medicine?
I'm not an expert, so I just leave it up to the experts.
You leave it up to the experts. Is that right?
in the private industry.
In the private industry. So what if you have no mechanism in the private industry in medicine? You know that everybody there is licensed, right?
Yeah, just like me. We don't follow regulations.
Okay. You don't follow regulations. So you're talking about what you want is a world in which your kids go to unlicensed doctors who have studied at unlicensed institutions to teach them about medicine, who are advocating all sorts of, I'm sure you're aware of the dynamic that took place with opioids in this country, who are prescribing drugs that have been tested only by the manufacturers of those drugs. They are under no requirement to show it to any agency. I'm sure you're also aware of what happened with the financial crisis when we had private bond ratings who supposedly were independent only because there was government regulation that said they supposedly had to be. And so you're willing to subject your kids to getting treated by a doctor for whom there are no standards whatsoever, who are prescribing drugs in which there are no standards as what they do it, who have gotten their education from institutions with no standards, or ones that they could simply purchase, right? Because
there are standards. There are standards in my industry as well.
Well, who imposes the standards for doctors?
Who opposes them?
Who imposes those standards for doctors?
Oh, themselves. They're the experts. So there's no way for...
How do you know they're the experts?
Because that's who the government references, because they use the reference. I actually was on the board.
Wait. Eliminate the government. I want you to tell me how you know they're experts, and don't say the word government.
Their services. If I can install an air conditioner and they can see that it's installed and working, then they know that I know what I'm doing.
Who, the customer?
Yeah.
Okay. How many patients of your doctor, of your kid's pediatrician have you consulted?
How many what?
How many patients of your doctor, of your kid's pediatrician have you consulted?
What's great about the free tech industry is that there's ratings on Google, which is excellent, actually, I think. I hope that the ratings don't get regulated by the government, because those are very useful to everybody.
You don't think that those ratings are in any way regulated? Like there's no...
or gamed.
Or gamed? Well, so you're willing to rely on Yelp with your kids going to a doctor. Is that right?
I'm willing to rely on the establishment. If I walk into there, if there are a bunch of nurses, I mean, it's obvious. If you go into an establishment that's, 30 years old, you can tell that the guy, and then when you talk to the guy, he's going to inform you of stuff that you're not aware of. Like I do my customers.
I see. So in other words, you don't know any other patients of your pediatrician, even though you just said the way to find out if I put in good air conditioners is go and ask my other customers.
Yeah, that's pretty much how everybody does it, pretty much.
Right.
I mean, it's not,
right.
We don't,
well, everybody right now relies on government licensing for their doctors. That's how they feel confident when they walk in there that this is not just some dude who decided to be a doctor, bought a doctor's outfit, and is now going around being a doctor.
Pretty sure there was one of those guys in Florida.
Well, they have happened. Certainly, they're the exception to the rule. But do you really think that you could walk in? Let me ask you this. Do you really think that you could walk into my office and I'm wearing a doctor's outfit and there's no regulations on this stuff, right? And that I couldn't convince you that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to doctoring?
I'm looking at an article, Florida teen arrests after posing as doctor, opening medical practice.
Oh no, that guy's going to be, he's going to, why would you go to a teenager to get like surgery?
But you know how. But he convinced some people he was a doctor, and you know how they found out he wasn't a doctor?
How?
He was unlicensed.
Oh, wow. So unlicensed means incompetent. Like everybody in the roofing industry, and I know them, is unlicensed. Everybody on the roof is an illegal alien. They don't even have documents. How do they know what they're doing?
Well, how do they know what they're doing with roofing? I mean,
they don't even have a social security number. How do you know? Because in order to get a license, you need a social security number. That's the first step.
So wait a second. You're saying the reason why we should have doctors who are unlicensed is because there are some companies who hire roofers that are undocumented. Is that the reasoning? Or you're saying it works out okay for roofing. Why wouldn't it work out for internal medicine or things like, I don't know, food safety?
You had a doctor call in to your show and explain to you what the regulations are and how much he follows them, you'd be shocked. And anyway, like the medical malpractice is one of the biggest costs.
That is absolutely 100% a fabrication.
Medical malpractice?
Medical malpractice is not remotely close to one of the largest costs. It also has nothing to do with your argument, incidentally.
Yes, it does. Licensed doctors can be incompetent.
Well, I'm not saying that licensed doctors can't be incompetent. Of course they can. But a whole industry of unlicensed doctors will surely bring you more incompetence.
But the licensing doesn't make them better. So
the licensing doesn't make them better. It's absurd. Of course it does. It says that you must have you have to have attended a medical school, for one. You have had to pass some tests that in any way like measure your least amount of competence.
Most doctors just give you aspirin and
Oh, so I understand it now. Doctors are not important, so we don't need them to be competent. Is that the argument?
Licensing doesn't make you competent.
I didn't say that licensing it makes you competent. Licensing weeds out people who have gotten no medical training.
No,
are you out of your effing mind? Dude, you can say that there are incompetent doctors who get medical training and still are bad, but licensing of doctors weeds out people who have not had medical training. If you do not think that medical training is important to being a doctor, which it sounds like you're sort of on the fence about because all they do is dispense aspirin, well, then maybe in that world it'll work. But this is absurd. This is absurd. Where do you go to get your medical treatment? Have you had, have you had any major dental work done?
Well, if we want to talk about it in general, the doctors that I've been to in my life, I'd say maybe.
Have you had any expensive medical procedures done in your life or anybody in your family?
Yes, arthroscopic knee surgery.
Okay. Where did you have that done? What country?
United States.
How much was it?
Unfortunately, at the time, it was $40,000 that
Okay. Let me ask you a question, dude. Listen, let me ask you a question. I know, I'm sure it was all regulation that added that expense. And if that's the case, why did you have it done in the United States?
I could have had it in Brazil. There are a lot of competent doctors in there.
Why didn't you do it?
Didn't cross my mind. I mean,
it didn't cross your mind? Wait a second. You're sitting here telling me that I need to have a total awareness about the pediatrician I sent my child to, and it didn't even cross your mind when you got to pay $40,000 that you could have gone to any number one of countries around the world. I don't even know why you got to go to Brazil. I mean, you can find it cheaper than that. You can find it cheaper than that. I'm sure like you could have found a dude in like Somalia Like, I mean, people must, like, you know, like, you could have come to countries that, like, you could have gotten cheaper done somewhere else. Why wouldn't you do that?
I could have. You're right. Yeah.
Why didn't you do that?
It didn't slip my mind. I mean,
It didn't. Wait a sec. So there's two different arguments here. One is that you're saying that we need to have total awareness about when we go to doctors because we're not going to have licensing. And then on the other hand, you're just like, you dropped 40 grand and didn't even contemplate the idea that I can go to a country that is far cheaper. It'll cost me, you know, max a couple of grand to fly to. Now you get the thing done, $1,800. Why didn't you just have your neighbor do it? You didn't have to tell anybody. Yeah, you could, I'm sure there was a YouTube that they could have done and just gotten to figure out a way of doing it that way.
But if my neighbor is a competent surgeon, then why not? I mean, you can tell when somebody doesn't know what they're talking about in any.
Hey, dude, don't tell me I can tell what I know what a doctor can do. You just blew 40 grand because you insisted on getting a doctor that was just local. It didn't even occur to you.
I don't know what you're saying. Like, you can walk into a doctor's office and know if he's incompetent or not.
No,
I can it's just a sense.
Super easy.
Like
are there any people in your business?
Sense.
Are there any people in your business who are incompetent?
Oh yeah.
How do they get business? How do they stay in business?
They don't.
They don't. So wait a second. You're telling me there's no HVAC businesses that you're aware of that are bad at what they do that stay in business for how long? How many customers do you think that they have before they go out of business?
Very few. The mechanics that I've trained, the ones that I know couldn't do well failed pretty quickly. They're working.
So you have no competitors who are any less competent than you are. They're all out of business.
Most of them are pretty good. Most of them are pretty good.
What do you mean most of them? What do you mean most of them? I'm asking you about all of them. You're in this business. You're asking me to judge my pediatrician's abilities without any sort of basis on that. Surely in your business, you must be aware of every single one of your competitors. How could you not be? And you're telling me that they're all excellent because otherwise they'd be out of business.
Yeah, the ones that are in business are all excellent. Same as your industry. I mean, who makes it in your industry? Only the people that know how to debate, which I commend you. You're a really good debater. And
no, that's not absolutely 100% not the case. There's a lot of idiots in my business.
Also, we're unregulated,
who are bad,
so.
And I'm not licensed.
But I think you're pretty good. So your competitors lose to you.
All right. Well, fair enough.
And you do.
That is the first thing that you've said that I think has any rationality to it whatsoever.
It
today.
Also, yeah, and that's why you lost this one, dude.
I do appreciate the call, and I hope, for the sake of your health and your children's health, you never, ever, ever have to live in the world that you hope will come about.
Okay. Nice talking to you.
All right, you too. Appreciate it, man.
Hey, well, he kept his cool.
It's already an uphill battle to be arguing against building codes and regulations in 2021 coming from Florida, but to argue against medical licensing entirely, I think.
We could have competing agencies that issue a medical license. I mean, just contemplate how this would work, right? Because that's the other answer that he didn't have, which is, well, we could have private licensing firms instead of the government. Oh, right. And here's my innovation in that world. I'm going to give you a good grade if you pay me money.
Well,
so
isn't that what the ratings agencies
That was the problem with the ratings agencies. That was something else.
Yay.
All right, let's take one more phone call. Calling from a 206 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, my name is Ivan, calling out of Federal Way, Washington.
Hello, Ivan. What's on your mind?
Two things. One, would be the regulation things. Like, I work in the food industry, and we're required to get something called the food handler's card, which essentially is like, like the washing your hands procedures, where to store fish properly, things like that.
Waste of time.
Required by law.
Waste of time. Waste of time. Waste of time.
I would check out the Lauren Boebert pork slider story to see how much of a waste of time this is.
Speaking as someone who just had food poisoning, I am never going to eat whatever that was again, and I'm fine. I'm fine.
But yeah, even like talking about like Typhoon Mary, like holy shit, like crazy stuff, like washing your hands is like the most important thing, and this guy just wants to cut off all regulations on that. So I don't want to live in that kind of world.
It wouldn't take long. I mean, when I used to get libertarians call in on my radio show, the first question I would ask them is, "Do you have diarrhea?" And if the answer was no, it would be because of the regulations that make sure that your drinking water is clean, and that your food is been properly handled. Because in the world that he's talking about, 60% of us at all times would have runaway diarrhea. But go ahead.
Can you imagine?
I can, actually. In the past couple of weeks, I've had a problem. But yes, continue, please.
Hello, Tushy.
Yes, there you go.
Well, I'm going to get to my second point. I like to see a lot of the topics that you talk about as in puzzles. And then once you put the puzzles together, it becomes like a bigger picture. For example, I saw your debate with Charlie Kirk. I believe it was like on inflation or the gold standard or something like that. And it was making a lot of sense because, for example, like with the wages, if they were to rise with the way the stock market was going, how our minimum wage would be like sitting at $30 plus, whatever.
It's not so much the stock market; it is actually productivity. How much, like with our economy's output, but it'd be closer to 24. But whatever, that's not the point remains.
Right. Like what you said right there, the productivity would be at least 24, whatever. I will give myself an example. I worked at a catering business as a delivery driver and receiving tips. And so my pay went from like 40 a year to before COVID, it was sitting at 71. And with that money, I was able to get a house and whatnot. But seeing other people struggle now, because I bought my house like 5 years ago or whatever, where the stock market or where the housing market wasn't as hot as it is right now. But like nobody could afford housings now because they don't have the money to do so. And so me, like, being able to like scratch the surface of like a high minimum paying job, it helps a lot. So if everybody had that opportunity, to make that kind of money, we would all be at least, middle class. But minimum wage is like $7.25. Like there's, no way that's going to happen. But anyways, so little pieces of your debates and whatnot, and other debates as well, is like I start putting all the puzzle pieces together, and it's just like, holy crap, For example, the gold standard, I looked into it. Why Richard Nixon got off of it was because essentially all the other countries were going to get their gold.
Well, the real problem ultimately with the gold standard is that if you have a finite amount of money, if you're not allowed to spend more money than the amount of gold you have, you are unable to counteract essentially major downturns in the economy. You're not able to generate cash and basically level out some of the the economy's dips, and you have a crisis, COVID. People can't go out and work, so we're going to print up some money. That's basically the bottom line. But listen, I appreciate the phone call. Thanks for calling, Ivan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's go to the IMs. What's that? Oh, should we?
Yes, let's do that IMs. But I just saw the time, and we've got to get to the Crowder thing at some point.
Okay, let's get to the Crowder.
Yeah.
Let's do a couple of these clips, folks. We're probably not going to have any more time for phone calls. I don't want to have people holding on and feel bad about it.
We're sorry, guys. But the libertarian call was just
couldn't help myself.
Too good.
Too much fun for me.
Yeah.
We should also talk a little bit about these sort of like, I don't know. Should we talk about how racist these guys are in terms of the Haitian immigrants, or should we just talk about like the racism that?
Let's do the James Bond thing.
Oh yeah, okay. This is Steven Crowder is such a moron, but it is like to see this level of low-end racism,
low-hanging fruit, just kind of brute but proud of it.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
For the caller who called in and said, like, in your industry, you don't have licensing and, people are, we've got some real idiots who do this kind of thing. I give you Steven Crowder of Louder with Crowder.
What? But the issue here is... Go super woke. Why do you need a black James Bond? This is the issue.
Oh, pause it for 1 second. Folks may not have heard about this, which I find hard to believe because this is really, 30 years into the 40 years? Are we 50 years? It's got to be 50. No, holy crap. It's 60 years into the film franchise of Bond. There have been, off the top of my head, 5, 6 Bonds.
Craig, Brosnan.
Oh, you don't remember. The first one was, you got Sean Connery, and then they had somebody else for Her Majesty's Secret Service. I can't remember his name. What? Lazenby. And then there was Roger Moore, and then you had the Remington Steele guy, Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
And
I only know Sean Connery of that era.
And Daniel Craig. There's been a lot of Bonds. Continue.
But the issue here is... Go super woke. Why do you need a black James Bond? This is the issue when people talk about it. It's like you're injecting race where it doesn't need to be. And let me just say this one thing.
Pause it for 1 second. This is so stupid. This guy is such a effing moron. It is amazing to me. First off, what do you mean? Why do you need a James Bond?
I was about
to
say, yeah, right. Like, no one's saying we need a black James Bond.
There has been, like I say, Timothy Dalton, yes. And you think he was underrated? I disagree. Bonds age out. And then the question is, who are we going to get next? And I think there have been some real mistakes in who they have replaced the prior Bonds with, et cetera, et cetera.
Craig's good. Craig's good.
But the idea that you would even contemplate having a black James Bond suddenly becomes, it's a need. It's being pushed on us. It's being jammed down our throat.
I wonder what Crowder's response would be whenever like Scarlett Johansson plays the character that was originally Asian or something like that.
Ghost
if he
in the
says
Shell,
maybe people are reacting too negatively toward them.
Right, of course. But continue here. Let's hear his complaint that we need a black James Bond.
A black James Bond. This is the issue when people talk about it. It's like you're injecting race where it doesn't need to be. And let me just say this one thing. This is one area when people talk about a black James Bond. There is no lack of representation of black American men in the action hero genre. If you were to have Will Smith at his peak, right? Will Smith, Men in Black, Independence Day, and run it opposite a James Bond vehicle on the same weekend, Will Smith would have decimated it. Will Smith,
Easily.
Denzel Washington, for crying out loud, they tried to sell us Jamie Foxx as an action hero. Shaq. There are plenty of black male action action heroes.
Richard Roundtree is and will always be the only shaft.
He will only be
anybody says.
the only one.
Yeah.
Well, I think it makes sense to have a black James Bond. I don't have a problem with it because you're pulling from
It
a
makes
culture.
zero
His name's
sense. I think
James
it's
Bond
perfectly
and he's a
fine.
white
Really, it
man.
makes sense to
Ian
have Idris
Fleming's a
Elba
white.
on a tarmac undercover in Siberia. Oh, where is the spy? I don't know. The only not white thing in whole peripheral.
Yeah, it's not good when it's like, we're going to need you to be at the ball and ready to meet our contact at 11:43, and then they're like, guys, it's 1:30.
Where is our spy?
Look, the script would have to change a little, granted. No, but I think you...
Did you turn my Ferragamos into a phone?
In Steven Crowder's precious world of MI6 agents, there's only one agent. There's only one agent.
All agents are
right.
white guys.
And so if you have James Bond, he can't be sent to pose as a Russian guy. Like, there's no other countries in the world. Now, it was never a problem, like, what are we going to do that James Bond is white? How are we going to put him on a mission to maybe, like,
the Middle East?
I don't know, get something in the Middle East?
Yeah, that's
right. I mean, like, what? An idiot.
That brings us to the real problem of this, which is like the British spies are bad in general, and British covert activity has been horrible. So why would you want a black spy? I don't know, to fuck some shit up in Africa, maybe. I don't know. It's obvious why.
Continue the colonial project there. That could be
exactly.
the pitch.
That's actually I think there's a left wing critique of do we really want is diversity just good for basically glorifying British Empire? But
it's also just I think the idea is we just want another cool dude to be Bond.
Absolutely, yeah, of course. And I'll watch it too.
This has got to be Idris Elba that they're talking about here, who would be awesome, and is not that I even care about James Bond. I'm an adult, and the extent to which. Fine, it's cool. I'll watch it. I like
the first
right, but
Craig one.
Are
was
you
really
getting?
good.
Yes, Daniel Craig's good. The better than Pierce Brosnan. But that's the extent of my caring about this franchise, because I'm an adult. But he's getting that worked up about it because oh my god,
it's not because he's
white space.
But you're important. That's an important point, because Crowder, this is for teenage boys. Crowder is not devoting this showtime to talk about how Denzel Washington is playing Macbeth now.
Right.
Yeah, no, he's not, because this is the performative masculinity that he can identify with. James Bond. Oh, he goes out and he bangs a bunch of women. He's so slick and cool with his gun. Like, this was my safe space. I could identify or aspire to be this guy. See, look at my holsters. I love these things.
My God.
And then let's not glaze over his little gremlin minion doing a black people are not on time joke. Oh, so
was that what that was?
That's what that was, yeah.
Are you effing kidding me?
No, that was that the spies wouldn't show up on time because they're black.
That's what he just said.
That was his joke. Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to Crowder's most racist joke yet. Go back a little, Bradley.
What?
Nasty-hearted little freaks, these guys.
Yes.
What utter scumbags.
Just so Sam can see this in real time.
Richard Roundtree is and will always be the only shaft.
He will only
anybody says.
the only one. Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense to have a black James Bond. I don't have a problem with it because you're pulling from a
makes
culture.
zero sense.
I think it's perfectly fine.
Really, it makes sense to
Ian
have Idris
Fleming's a
Elba
white.
on a tarmac undercover in Siberia. Oh, where is the spy? I don't know. The only not white thing in whole peripheral.
Yeah, it's not good when it's like, we're going to need you to be at the ball and ready to meet our contact at 11:43, and then they're like, guys, it's 1:30.
Where is our spy?
Look, the script would have to change a little, granted.
Make a joke that the black spy isn't going to be on time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It is just these are jokes. These are racist jokes from 1950.
I know, and Crowder's. I mean, we're burying the Crowder racist joke, which is at the end of this.
All right, well, let's keep going.
Joke.
It's not good when it's like, we're going to need you to be at the ball and ready to meet our contact at 11:43, and then they're like, Guys, it's 1:30.
Where is our spy?
Look, the script would have to change a little, granted. No, but I think you...
Did you turn my Ferragamos into a phone?
What the... What did you do to my watch? What the fuck was my watch and my car? I can't... You look, I can't see the plate on the car. You know what's going to happen with 5-0? I'll get pulled over for that shit. I can't do that shit. Dropping spikes and shit. I don't Roger Moore moonrake motherfucker. And the problem is then he's going to take out the anti-aircraft guns to put in subwoofers. Hit the button.
Look, I didn't say put Chris Rock
the turbo. That motherfucker plays Drake. I don't know.
Yeah, you just sit in a bar, you hear a building explode, and he's like, "Is it Wednesday?"
No, it's the positive. He's being so nakedly racist there that it almost as if like they're not like the entire crew is not even laughing.
It's not about being
anymore.
funny right now. It's about being serious.
Exactly.
And that
like
guy's like, no, but he might be. No, but I mean, maybe he could be a black guy. I don't mean Chris Rock. Like the guy trying to join in, and he's not being racist enough for them.
Right.
Yeah.
But as he's going on his black voice and going, hey, we're gonna and we're gonna take out the aircraft carrier and put in like big speakers. This is just racist garbage. It is such garbage.
Also, did you notice how he can't contemplate the concept of a black British person? He said black Americans. Matt pointed that out.
Yeah, he's like, there's plenty of black Americans in films. Like, Idris Elba's not American, is at least my understanding.
He's not American. That's what. That's
I wonder
like
if
the
he
one
knows that there are
criteria
black people in...
No, he doesn't.
In Scotland, for instance, like where Bond's from, yes, there are, in fact.
Yes, and that's like the one criteria that they want for Bond is they want him to be a native Englishman or whatever. And so he can't understand that basic concept. His stereotyping is black American. Keeps talking about black American, specifically action stars. He said black American. It's his mind's so limited, and he is so racist.
It really is
and proud
just
of it.
shockingly impressive, like how stunted this guy is.
Yeah, a weak-hearted little racist.
So weak, such a weak heart.
And the stuntedness is evident in it. I just want to reiterate this in the emotional attachment to Bond as he was in your childhood.
Give me another white guy. But I don't even know if that's real. I don't even know if that's real. I think it's just the idea of like, he's just pushing this because it's an opportunity for him, another opportunity to express racism, right? It's really just sort of like, this is a prime example of how they're trying to replace us.
I know, but as Matt said about, I don't know which black actor you were talking, or Denzel Washington playing
Denzel's playing Macbeth.
Okay, right. He's not up in arms about that.
Well, because he's just an idiot and probably isn't even aware of it.
And his teenage boys that he's appealing to also.
Right. They don't care about that.
He's arrested in a teenage boy mentality. So this kind of again, performative masculinity, the spy stuff, he gets all the girls, he shoots all the guns, he jumps out of all the planes. That has got to be my space. And that's why he chooses to get outraged about this, to, do hate speech under the guise of comedy.
It really is unbelievable and disturbing that there are like kids out there watching this who are just...
Yeah. At that
but
part,
that's tubes for you.
That's like the dark side of this is he has a significant amount of reach and he normalizes this kind of stuff. I just think about I don't know, any of my black friends or whatever seeing that kind of stuff like that. It's just it makes my blood boil.
I mean, the idea that any of just kids in general would see that, it's so gross.
There's the neo-Confederate white supremacist sentiment in this country that goes back obviously to the founding, but has been impolite, and this is one of the ways that they're able to express themselves. Crowder basically speaks for those people.
Just joking. Just making the classic old joke about how black spies would want woofers, speakers, instead of an anti-aircraft gun. Or would be late, because the black people are late all the time.
Right, and that's also, the blackness would make them incompetent. They'd be late, and they wouldn't have the adequate artillery because they'd put speakers in instead of machinery.
It's also weird the way that they will compliment a black person, this guy will always be chef to me right before doing that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay. Should we play Charlie Kirk, or should we do the which one do you think is more sort of disgusting? Huh?
We could do Bill Gates.
Yeah, well, that's actually pretty fun. We can do that. It's always fun to see Bill Gates being held to account for even a little bit. Now, personally, I would be more interested in seeing the interview with Bill Gates where they talked about his billion-dollar experiment, really multi-billion-dollar experiment, that had the impact of creating even more the ripples from his experiment in terms of what it did to U.S. education. And the experiment they did in the Pacific Northwest with a bunch of schools, and then all the sort of subsequent and tangential funding that they had to turn schools into a certain direction of high-stakes testing and value-added methodologies of assessing teacher quality. And I never, ever, ever saw a single interview with Bill Gates about the Rand Corporation report that they commissioned that came back with that whole experiment was a big mistake. We should have listened to educators in the first place.
Or how about a question about him blocking IP waivers for vaccines?
COVAX, the whole reason why we have such a dearth of vaccines around the world, even according to COVAX's own sort of projections. Have not seen that interview either. But easier, I guess, for folks to do it this way. But it is nice to see at least Bill Gates feel a little bit uncomfortable in some moment, because hopefully this softens the ground for those other questions.
Right. There are billionaire kingmakers who affect so much of our world and our society who are never held to account for the structural things that they do. But now that he's associated with a pedophile, we get to have a little bit of catharsis that I wish could be extrapolated to more structural things, but again, helpful.
Play this.
It was reported at that time that you had a number of meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, who, when you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors. What did you know about him when you were meeting with him, as you've said yourself, in the hopes of raising money?
I had dinners with him. I regret doing that. He had relationships with people he said, would give to global health, which is a interest I have. Not nearly enough philanthropy goes in that direction. Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in what he proposed.
When she asks, what did you know about him in that moment? She's asking that because this is after he's been busted for stuff. Not like...
Well, he's sort of answering. He might have been able to deliver money to my initiatives. Now, let's also be clear. This guy's got a lot of effing money.
Yeah.
Who do you need to sit down at a table with? And then, of course, the real thing is, like, to be fair to me, none of those things panned out. So
right. But also, aside from the philanthropy, what did you know about him?
Right.
That other people could have read about maybe in the newspapers.
And it's not like I got news for you, folks. When you're a billionaire, you don't meet with anybody who your minions have not vetted. But continue.
Right.
Direction. Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in.
That's why they were a mistake.
He purported, and I cut them off. That goes back a long time ago now. So there's nothing new on that.
It was reported that you continued to meet with him over several years.
Oh, that's new. No.
And that, in other words, a number of meetings. What did you do when you found out about his background?
Well, I've said I regretted having those dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
How mad he is.
Well, he's dead, so...
he's dead.
Looking at this?
Oh.
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful. And I'm very proud of what we've done in philanthropy. Very proud of the work of the foundation. That's what I get up every day and focus on.
Well, it's weird that after being interrogated or, asked, actually, I should say, polite questions by this PBS reporter, that he goes to, well, he's dead. So no new information can be provided here.
That's right.
Right? That's why
did
you
you
need to stop
learn?
asking me questions.
What did you do when you learned about that? Nothing.
Yeah,
Just had another dinner.
And just so you know, so he's seething. Dead man can't talk.
Crack.
Oh!
I would like to focus on another thing he said, which is that I cut those meetings off. This is from the New York Times. Mr. Epstein and Mr. Gates first met face-to-face on the evening of January 31st, 2011. This is after Epstein served time. In Mr. Epstein's townhouse on the Upper East Side, they were joined by Dr. Eva Anderson Dubin, a former Miss Sweden who Mr. Epstein had once dated, and her 15-year-old daughter. Dr. Anderson Dubin's husband, the hedge fund billionaire Glenn Dubin, was a friend and business associate of Mr. Epstein's. The Dubins declined to comment. The gathering started at 8 and lasted several hours, according to Miss Arnold, Mr. Gates' spokeswoman. Mr. Epstein subsequently boasted about having the meeting in emails to friends and associates. Epstein was really transactional with this stuff. He used it to boost himself
leverage,
immediately. Bill's great, he wrote in one reviewed by the Times. Mr. Gates, in turn, praised Mr. Epstein's charm and intelligence, emailing colleagues the next day saying, "A very attractive Swedish woman and her daughter dropped by, and I ended up staying there quite late." So, what did you know about him? I knew he had some money, and also I knew that there was
Swedish women.
Yeah, what would maybe a 15-year-old Swedish girl, like, what would that bring up as far as like my previous information about Jeffrey Epstein? I don't know. Maybe that would trigger something.
Well, like I say, the value of it is, one, the catharsis of watching this guy squirm for a minute, but it also hopefully loosens the ground a little bit so people aren't so afraid to question him on a whole range of other things. Most importantly, his work in public policy health and his protection of IP and what he did to our education system in this country. We're still reeling from the impacts. And then just the broader structural thing. Put Gates aside for a moment. The idea that a guy who has judgment like he exhibited with Epstein could, on a whim, change the direction of world health, U.S. education, whatever it is, because he can expend whatever it is. He can, public transport, with Elon Musk. Having people walk around with that kind of money and the power that represents, who can make a decision with the same sort of amount of thought that I make in terms of, like, should we switch out these cameras? Which it really, honestly, probably dollar for dollar, maybe changing the cameras is actually even a bigger decision in terms of like how it materially impacts, my life, the expenditure of those dollars relative to, like, this guy could lose a couple billion behind the couch and not even know it.
Well, but he had to meet with Epstein to raise funds, so maybe you're underestimating how much he needs money.
The whole point, though, is that we do not want human beings to have that level of power in our world, because humans are fallible.
Yep. And the divine right of billionaires.
Indeed. All right, we're going to take one last phone call because I promised. And I just got some IMs. 308. I hope this is you, because if it's not you, I'm hanging up on you. Who is this?
Okay, I kind of set that up as a joke, Sam, but I really do appreciate your love of farming.
I want to know what the farm report is. Kowalski from Nebraska.
So far, things are looking like the projections over the summer. Prices have gone up marginally because I think harvest is slightly lagging, though that is mostly weather related. It looks like the crop is going to be fairly good, but due to overall global supply, prices should actually stay fairly high. And to that point, maybe farmers will not be as politically engaged this coming midterms because, well, things are actually looking up. Also, a lot of supply chain stuff is being figured out, so it's possible inputs could come down. Fertilizer was going to be a big killer come spring, but if they can get the shipping containers to China, where we get most of our fertilizer, it shouldn't be too bad.
Do you hear anything about the shipping? I mean, I met once, like, over the past year, a shipping container broker, and I should have taken their info to ask them, because I feel like that's everything right now.
I don't know any personally, but I do know that they cost about $2,200 during normal times because there's a lot of rail traffic that obviously goes through the Great Plains and the Midwest. And so you just get these shipping containers all over the place, and some people buy them for sheds and whatnot. But yeah, they're fairly cheap. But I think the problem is that a lot of supply chains went to areas that don't normally get the containers.
That's exactly what happened. The PPE got sent around the world, and there's no way to get those back because they're empty. And so nobody's paying to ship them wherever back.
Yes, and for whatever reason, you would think the World Trade Organization or someone would have just said, we'll just foot the bill to get them back because it would make the most sense. But I guess maybe no country wanted to really bite the bullet on that. But anyways, yeah, for the most part, harvest is going fairly smooth. You can check some of that out on, the Prairie Fire YouTube channel. But for the most part, yeah, things are actually looking up quite a bit. And is there anything in particular you wanted to know about harvest?
No, that's about it for me.
Well, today is the equinox. There is also still a full moon, so it is the harvest moon. I don't know what significance that has, but cheers. Fall is here.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kowalski.
Moon was looking great last night.
All right.
It's huge.
It was.
All right, so that is the caller portion of our program. I'm going to read a couple IMs, and then we're going to have to get out of here. Yeah?
Yeah.
Oliver Wendell Homeslice. Sammy, your explanation of the procedure behind the infrastructure and budget reconciliation bills yesterday was like trying to learn the rule against perpetuities after dropping a tab of bad acid. Anyway, thank you for giving me a traumatic Vietnam-style flashback to law school. The horror. The horror. For all of you youngies and non-law schoolies, I can tell you the rule against perpetuities is so complicated. It is one of the few things that a lawyer cannot be sued for in terms of malpractice. It has to do with the way that a property is passed down or something to that, or covenants that are imposed upon it. I don't know. And I will also say the horror is what Colonel what's-his-face said in Apocalypse Now. Kurtz in Apocalypse Now.
Have you ever heard the Dickens novel Bleak House?
No.
It's one of his better ones. It's about a property inheritance case that goes on for generations and generations.
I don't doubt it. We still have that. Lefty Luke. Makes me slightly uncomfortable when you discuss people who are ineligible for vaccines. Hubel reach around. Can we label this portion of the pandemic the I'd rather be dead than wrong phase? Charlie Kirk's punchable face. Sam, I'm wondering if you could ask Daniel what he thinks about the anti-immigrant talking point of wage suppression effect on immigrants legitimized by the veneer of impartiality by George Boras. Has the Libertarian caller today ever heard of Dr. Death? Chantel, hey Sam, I tried to be a contrarian, but do admire your ability to break down concepts. Can you please explain how you said that Pelosi doesn't want the bill to fail like it is failing now? What's the evidence of her pure-hearted intent to pass this beyond letters to colleagues? Has she reached out to progressives like they are courting and pacifying Manchin? No, she didn't take a question seriously about progressive demands when asked yesterday. I understand Biden wants to do the right thing, but your defense of Pelosi is disappointing.
Because progressives are in lockstep with what
exactly.
Biden
she has the progressives already.
Yes. Yeah.
And what they're now trying to do is move to how do we not lose? And so the intransigents are people who are already who need this bill less. This is simply just a formula. This is not about defense of Pelosi. And it's also like just the context. Nancy Pelosi doesn't dictate what CNN does. This is the progressives in our politics. The playing field is not leveled. It is because of the nature of our politics in our society and capitalism, frankly, that the money has the power. And so they're less powerful. I wasn't defending Pelosi. I was just saying that Pelosi wants to win. She wants to have a win. And so the calculation now is how do they get to a win and satiate the people that are blocking them? And she knows that she has the progressives because the progressives want the expenditure of this money. They want $1 trillion as opposed to no trillion in that reconciliation. And to the extent that Biden and Pelosi have an agenda here, if they think that they can sell a $1 trillion reconciliation bill as a win, they'll take it. That's the point. That's the point why it's important how Chris Cuomo frames this stuff, because we don't want there to be space for them to say Biden won if it is reduced significantly. That's what's going on here. Flare Child. Shout out to my wife, Katie. She listens at home with the baby who's teething. Sorry to be so heteronormative, just trying to survive. I understand. Jayapal Hardball. Much respect to Jayapal going mainstream news channels and categorically calling out how they vote down if both bills don't come together. But where is AOC? She's only good for social media now? Why is she not coming to the fore? Because AOC is more of a target. Jayapal is just, and AOC, and Jayapal is the head of the CPC.
Yeah.
Didn't Bernie win that messaging war when he reached out? I think, well, it's a different, he's got a different profile. A, he's a senator, but B, he's also a white guy.
And he's the chair of the budget committee.
Rabbit from Boston. Angela Nagel is an out-and-out reactionary. Kill All Normies is a decent book, but everything she said and done after that has been vile. Your guest laid it out. She supports a xenophobic perversion of leftist ideals. Fierce Deity. Emma, what are your thoughts on this terrible new taunting rule in the NFL? Apparently it was John Mara's idea.
Well, it doesn't shock me. But
Who's that?
Owner of the Giants.
And why do owners get
to say anything?
They're
not allowed to taunt?
It's like the entire governing body of the league is all 32 owners, and they vote on everything. And Mara is just like a old school football guy, right? You know, he's very like he's a Democrat, but he's just like a conservative type, you know, old school football owner.
Yeah, down with ownership too.
I mean, there's a reason they traded Odell, right? They want everybody to be buttoned up. I hate it, but you know. That's why the Giants have lost so much in recent years.
A Square. Sam and Emma, watching the Dems and Biden administration letting this moment of multiple crises go to waste is infuriating and depressing. The filibuster had to go, and this bill should have moved months ago. Voting rights bill, too, even with this horrid Supreme Court. Yeah. The bright light is that Jayapal and other members of the Progressive Caucus are doing better politics and better policies and outcomes. It reminds me of something you and I have debated about over the years. Is it political incompetence or bad actors in Dem leadership? That Schumer speech yesterday sits at the intersection of both. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's both.
Have you read my email? Math's first swear word was probably capitalist. Jersey Max. I started cursing in 4th grade. I was fishing with my friend, and I left to walk my grandma's house to poop. And while I was sitting on the toilet, I made the decision to start cursing. Went back to the stream we were fishing in, and I just let loose and said all the bad words. That's hilarious. I feel like Saul is in that category soon. Train Boy, isn't buying property something libertarians recommend doing to avoid risks? How can someone fail this bad at being a libertarian? Poggers! A child saying pussies may have been a big deal back then, but kids these days use an even worse P word. I see it constantly online and hear it out in the street or the town square. I won't even mention it to protect the more sensitive listeners.
What are you guys talking about?
I don't know. Penis? White communist, the loudest megaphone in the U.S. media belongs to Joe Biden. So why has Biden not used his platform to drown out corporate media blaming congressional progressives for sinking his agenda instead of blaming right-wing Democrats? Why hasn't every American who watches TV on any channel seen President Biden urging for his $3.5 trillion bill plan to be passed and reciting the highly popular elements in that plan? Trump certainly knew how to catapult the propaganda. With the noose of white supremacist fascism cinching tighter around us, the situation reminds me of the Yeats line, "The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." I mean, I don't know that Biden is the best, but I think that's I think that is a real problem. Joe Biden's got to go out there and push this more.
Yeah, one answer is he's not Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Right.
Dub. Personally, I trust my roofer to do my doctor stuff. All right, 3 more. Smoke that Shire loud. Oh, wait. I'd like to see a competent doctor fix my air conditioner. Checkmate, Seder. Mayonnaise as a spice. The white James Bond will die of starvation on a mission to India because he can't handle spicy food. Jonathan Armstead. They send James Bond to Jamaica in 2 movies.
Yeah.
It was more awkward than watching Crowder talk to a black person. Oh, my God. DJ Cold Case. Black people inject race where it doesn't belong whenever they sit at the front of the bus or go to school. And the final I am of the day. It was Jay Chivone just saying Timothy Dalton. So let me do one more.
Very Jay. I am.
Ratings win. Big fan, Sam, but to be honest, most people actually use Google search and ratings to shortlist top dentists around me. I am a marketer. I spend millions on such search results. You can't deny that. Certifications come only when someone is in doubt. The last caller was blinded and limited in understanding, but his point about Google was spot on. Well, yes, people search that, but they know the baseline is these dentists are all licensed.
Yeah.
It would be a big problem if there was no baseline for these dentists and it was all just a function of juicing their marketing. That's the problem. Matt, Bradley, Emma, good job today. See you folks. Well, I'll see Emma tomorrow and then on Friday, and bye.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know